Today, I want to share with you something that's not just motivational, it's neurobiological. There's a specific way of speaking to yourself, a structure of internal dialogue that can begin to rewire your brain in as little as 4 days. This isn't about empty affirmations or wishful thinking. This is about leveraging the science of neuroplasticity, your brain's innate ability to change itself by using targeted, self-directed language. The words you say to yourself aren't just abstract. They cue biochemical cascades. They trigger hormonal shifts. They activate or deactivate specific neural circuits. So when you shift how you speak to yourself, you're not just shifting mindset, you're literally changing the architecture of your nervous system. We now know from neuroscience that what you repeat to yourself, especially in heightened states of focus, gets encoded more deeply. If repeated consistently, it shapes your perception, your behavior, and even your identity. And the remarkable thing is, this change doesn't take months. It can begin in days, just 4 days. So in this talk, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do that, how to talk to yourself in a way that aligns with your biology, with your goals, and with the person you're becoming. Let's get into the protocols. When we talk about self-talk, most people default to the first person. I can do this, I'm strong, I will succeed. While this seems intuitive, research in neuroscience and psychology has uncovered something surprising. Using the second person, saying you can do this, may actually produce greater benefits in motivation, emotional regulation, and performance. This seemingly small grammatical shift activates a different part of the brain and influences behavior in a significantly more powerful way. In fact, when you speak to yourself using you instead of I, you're tapping into a kind of internal coaching system that mirrors the psychological effects of receiving external guidance. You're essentially becoming your own guide, stepping into a perspective that is more objective, more encouraging, and more effective. Neuroscientific studies using fMRI scans show that second-person self-talk engages brain regions associated with perspective taking and social cognition, such as the temporoparietal junction and medial prefrontal cortex. These are the same areas activated when we think about how others see us or when we receive support from someone else. So when you say to yourself, you are capable of handling this, your brain processes it similarly to how it would respond if a mentor or trusted friend said it to you. This distancing allows you to bypass some of the self-doubt and emotional entanglement that often comes with first-person self-talk. When you're emotionally overwhelmed or facing high-stress situations, speaking to yourself in the second person can help you regulate your response more effectively because it creates a gap, a moment of psychological space where clarity can emerge. This concept is particularly useful in situations requiring high performance under pressure: athletes, public speakers, students facing exams, or entrepreneurs making critical decisions. Research from the University of Michigan and the University of Illinois found that individuals who used second-person self-talk before a stressful task exhibited better problem-solving, reduced anxiety, and enhanced performance. This is likely because the brain interprets second-person directives as coming from an external authority figure, which gives the command more weight and urgency. The instruction to "you've got this, just breathe and focus" sounds less like wishful thinking and more like a directive with power behind it. But there's another layer to this. Second-person self-talk doesn't just improve performance, it also helps reinforce identity change. When you're trying to become someone new, more confident, more disciplined, more resilient, the brain needs consistent cues that support the new identity. Saying "I am confident" can sometimes be rejected by the subconscious if it conflicts too strongly with how you currently feel. But saying "you are becoming more confident every day" feels like advice or encouragement, not denial. That slight detachment softens the resistance. It gives the brain something it can accept and work with. The self becomes both speaker and listener, and the effect compounds with repetition. Consistency matters here. To rewire a habit or strengthen a new mindset, repetition over days is essential. The brain's plasticity, its ability to change and adapt, is experience dependent. When you repeat a second-person affirmation while under emotional intensity or focused effort, you're creating stronger synaptic connections that reinforce that belief. Doing this over 4 days with intention and specificity can start to imprint a new cognitive pattern. This is how small shifts create lasting change. The structure of the second-person self-talk also matters. It's most effective when phrased in present or near future tense, and when it involves actionable or emotionally relevant content. You are strong, you can handle this, you are growing every time you face this. These phrases cue not only a motivational response, but also a neurochemical one. They increase dopamine release, the neurotransmitter associated with reward, learning, and forward motion. Dopamine is what tells the brain, this matters, let's do it again. That's why self-talk becomes more than just language. It becomes neurochemical instruction. Another key to amplifying the effects of second-person self-talk is vocalization. Saying it out loud, even softly, adds another sensory input, auditory processing. This multisensory engagement creates stronger encoding in memory and more effective emotional impact. It's one thing to think the phrase. It's another to hear it in your own voice. This creates a feedback loop that reinforces belief and primes the nervous system for action. The sound of your own voice carries authority. It resonates with a part of your brain that registers safety and self-recognition. When you say, "You've got this," and hear yourself say it, you're not just thinking the words, you're embodying them. Additionally, the environment in which you use this self-talk can influence its effect. Practicing it in emotionally charged or challenging moments right before a presentation, during a workout, in the midst of self-doubt, helps the brain associate the phrase with regulation and strength. This pairing of challenge with encouragement is what wires in resilience. The next time you face that situation, the neural pathway is already primed with a coping mechanism that has worked before. One of the most overlooked but scientifically supported strategies for reshaping the brain through self-talk is pairing it with deep focus and visual attention. When these elements are combined, intentional language, directed focus, and visual anchoring, the brain moves into a state of heightened neuroplasticity. This means it becomes more ready to change, adapt, and encode new patterns of behavior and thought. The core principle here is that the brain doesn't just change because we say something repeatedly. It changes because of the state we're in when we say it. If you're distracted or half present, the neural signals are weak. But when you're focused and visually engaged, the brain interprets the input as important and begins to prioritize it for lasting storage. The mechanism behind this lies in how the brain prioritizes information. From a neurological perspective, attention acts as a highlighter. It signals to the brain, "This matters." When you direct your visual attention to a specific point in your environment while engaging in self-talk, you activate the frontal and parietal cortices regions responsible for goal-directed behavior and sensory processing. This combination helps anchor your internal dialogue to something tangible, enhancing its effectiveness. For example, looking at a single object while telling yourself you are focused, you are capable of handling this moment, creates a closed loop of attention and intention. The visual system stabilizes your gaze, the language system imprints the message, and the entire system is more likely to encode the experience into long-term memory. This isn't just abstract theory. Studies in neuropsychology and behavioral neuroscience show that when people engage in learning or self-regulation while in a state of deep, narrowed visual focus, the brain's plasticity mechanisms, especially those involving acetylcholine and dopamine, are activated. These neurochemicals enhance signal-to-noise ratio, meaning that the important information, your self-talk, gets through more clearly while distractions are suppressed. If you combine this with a heightened emotional state, the plasticity effect becomes even stronger. This is why high-stakes situations, public speaking, athletic performance, emotional breakdowns are fertile ground for reprogramming thought patterns when paired with focused self-talk and visual anchoring. There's also a physiological reason why this pairing works. Visual attention controls arousal levels through connections with the brainstem and autonomic nervous system. When you lock your gaze on a point, whether it's a spot on the wall, the horizon, or even your own reflection, you trigger a slight sympathetic activation that sharpens mental and physical readiness. This primes the body to take in new information and engage with it. Now, when you layer self-talk onto that, you're speaking to a nervous system that is alert, present, and ready to encode. You're not just talking to yourself, you're giving instructions to a brain that is chemically and physically ready to change. An important detail is the timing of when this pairing happens. For it to be most effective, the self-talk should occur during or just after the moment of intense visual focus. For example, during a workout, locking your gaze before a challenging rep and saying, "You are strong. You are built for this," leverages the natural neurochemical surge that comes with exertion. The self-talk is riding a wave of neural readiness, which increases the likelihood it will be remembered and internalized. Similarly, in a moment of emotional stress, directing your eyes to one fixed point and speaking encouraging words to yourself stabilizes both your visual and emotional field. It creates structure where the brain would otherwise spiral. The content of the self-talk also matters. It should be short, affirmative, and rhythmic. The rhythm matters because it creates a temporal structure that the brain can latch onto, almost like a metronome for your nervous system. A steady cadence of "you're calm, you're ready, you know what to do," delivered with focus and visual stillness, sends a more coherent signal than scattered, unfocused monologue. The more deliberate and consistent the rhythm, the more the brain can entrain to it. Over time, this creates a conditioned response. Focus phrase equals readiness. What's also critical is avoiding passive visual states like screen scrolling or vague staring while doing self-talk. Those states diffuse attention, and with it, the effectiveness of the message. Instead, the ideal environment is one with minimal distraction and a deliberate visual target. Some people use a point on the wall, others use a symbol or mantra card, and some use the mirror. The mirror is especially powerful because it activates self-recognition circuits in the brain. When you see yourself and speak in second person, you are doing this. You're handling it. The visual and auditory feedback loops reinforce each other. The eyes confirm presence. The voice confirms purpose. By making this a structured daily protocol, even for just a few minutes, you begin to train your brain to associate focus with self-guidance. This doesn't just create a habit, it reshapes identity. You start to see yourself not just as someone who reacts, but someone who responds with clarity and intention. Over time, that begins to shift the entire way your brain handles stress, goals, and personal growth. Future-oriented language has a profound effect on how the brain organizes thought, behavior, and emotion. When you speak to yourself in a way that points forward toward who you are becoming, rather than who you've been, you're activating a specific set of neural networks responsible for imagination, planning, and identity transformation. These networks include the prefrontal cortex, the default mode network, and the hippocampus, which collectively play a role in constructing mental time travel. This mental time travel is not just fantasy. It's a neurological function that allows us to simulate future scenarios and, crucially, begin to align our behavior with those simulations. When you tell yourself you are becoming more disciplined every day or you're building confidence with every action, the brain doesn't reject this as fiction. It begins to scaffold around that statement as a possible reality. The power in this kind of language lies in its ability to direct cognitive and emotional energy toward growth instead of survival. The brain is constantly filtering information through a lens of either threat or opportunity. When you use future-oriented self-talk, you help shift your brain out of defensive mode and into proactive mode. This has enormous implications for motivation. Instead of bracing against failure or trying to fix the past, your attention goes toward creating what's next. This shift changes not only your inner dialogue, but your entire physiological state. Cortisol levels drop, dopamine levels rise, and the body begins to prepare for action rather than protection. That neurochemical signature becomes a physical cue that reinforces the words you're saying to yourself. The feedback loop tightens and change accelerates. Most people, when talking to themselves, focus on their current struggle or their past limitations. While it may feel honest, it can also reinforce those exact patterns. Saying things like "I've always been bad at this" or "I'm still not confident" doesn't just describe reality, it perpetuates it. The brain, especially the subconscious, doesn't differentiate very well between what's real and what's rehearsed. If you keep repeating self-defeating narratives, the brain encodes those patterns more deeply. But if you shift the grammar and start using phrases like "I'm becoming more capable" every day, you initiate a subtle but powerful shift. That forward-looking structure sends a different signal to the brain. This is where we're going. This is what we're building. And this is the identity we're stepping into. Language literally sculpts perception. When you change your self-talk to reflect who you are becoming rather than who you have been, you change how you see options, possibilities, and risks. It becomes easier to take small steps forward because you're no longer trapped in a fixed narrative. You've created narrative momentum. This is essential for forming habits. The future-oriented language acts like a magnet, pulling you toward your best self, and over time, the behavior starts to match the story. Neuroscience refers to this as self-referential processing. When you make the future self feel more real through vivid, emotionally charged language, the brain treats that self more like a current responsibility and less like a distant dream. That's where change begins to stick. An important nuance in future-oriented self-talk is emotional believability. If your statements are too disconnected from your current emotional state, the brain may resist or even reject them. So instead of saying I'm already successful when you feel like you're struggling, it can be more effective to say, I'm learning to become successful through these challenges. This version still points forward, but it meets the brain where it currently is. That bridge between current state and future self allows for buy-in. It's not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about consistently reminding yourself of the direction you're going in, a way your nervous system can accept and support. Another technique that deepens this effect is combining future-oriented language with visualization. When you speak a phrase like you are growing into a powerful communicator and simultaneously picture yourself on a stage or in a meaningful conversation, you're layering visual imagery on top of verbal programming. This dual engagement recruits more brain regions, particularly those related to sensory processing and emotion, and increases the likelihood that the message will be encoded. Repeating this practice daily strengthens the neural pathways associated with that future identity, making it feel less like an aspiration and more like an inevitability. Over time, the words, images, and emotional associations begin to form a coherent narrative that the brain uses to guide daily behavior. This method is especially effective during moments of transition or uncertainty. When the future feels unclear, that's the ideal time to begin using language that installs clarity and conviction. Saying to yourself you're navigating this uncertainty with strength or you're building resilience that will serve you in ways you can't yet see keeps the brain focused on motion and growth. It prevents the mind from looping in fear-based or regressive patterns and trains it to look ahead, even when the path isn't fully visible. By doing this consistently, the future you talk about becomes more emotionally charged, more believable, and more magnetic. One of the most critical but often misunderstood aspects of self-talk is the importance of framing. The way we phrase our internal language has a direct impact on how the brain interprets and acts on it. Negations such as don't, won't, or can't may seem useful when trying to avoid a behavior or thought, but they often backfire neurologically. The brain processes language in images and actions, not abstract logic. So when you say, I won't get distracted, the dominant image and concept being processed is distracted. This activates the very neural pattern you're trying to avoid. The more effective strategy is to state what you do want in clear, positive, and actionable terms. This shifts the brain's focus from avoidance to execution, from inhibition to direction. From a neuroscience standpoint, action-oriented statements recruit different circuits than negation-based ones. When you say, I choose focus, you activate the brain's goal-directed systems, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for attention, planning, and decision-making. In contrast, when you say, I won't get distracted, the initial activation may still occur in the attentional system, but the emotional and cognitive load associated with negation creates noise in the system. That noise reduces clarity, increases cognitive friction, and leads to mental fatigue more quickly. In practical terms, the brain becomes more likely to waver or lose energy when it's operating in a mode of avoidance. Direction-based language provides a map, while negation leaves a void that often gets filled by the very patterns you're trying to escape. There's also a difference in how these statements affect motivation. Positive, actionable self-talk triggers reward pathways in the brain. When you tell yourself, I am calm and composed under pressure, the brain can begin to visualize that state and reward the effort to move toward it. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with drive and learning, increases when the brain senses progress or alignment with a desired identity. On the other hand, language centered on what not to do rarely triggers this sense of forward movement. There's no image of success, no target to hit, no feedback loop of reward. As a result, motivation stays low, and the effort feels heavier. This becomes especially important in moments of stress or fatigue when the brain's cognitive resources are already diminished. In these states, clarity and simplicity matter more than ever. Saying don't panic under pressure tends to heighten anxiety because the brain hears and visualizes panic. But saying breathe deeply and stay present creates a specific action for the mind and body to follow. It gives the nervous system a behavioral anchor. The small shift in language can lead to a dramatic shift in physiology, slower breath, decreased heart rate, and activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. In this way, self-talk becomes not just cognitive, it becomes physiological regulation. The concept applies just as powerfully to long-term behavior change. People often focus on stopping bad habits. I won't eat junk food. I'll stop procrastinating. I won't lose my temper. But these goals are framed in negation and leave the brain without a compelling replacement behavior. Over time, this weakens follow-through and strengthens the sense of failure when the old behavior reappears. Instead, when self-talk is reframed into positive, executable choices, I choose nourishing food, I take one step now, I speak with calm authority, it gives the brain a clear model to follow. Habits are formed through repetition of behavior tied to identity, and actionable language reinforces both the behavior and the identity shift that supports it. There's a rhythm and tone that further amplifies the effect of this type of self-talk. Actionable phrases delivered in a calm, deliberate tone tend to imprint more deeply. When you speak to yourself with conviction, using statements like "you are stepping into focus now" or "you are choosing discipline in this moment," it engages both auditory and emotional centers in the brain. The cadence and emotional charge of the statement create a stronger neural representation, making it more likely to be recalled and followed in future moments of decision. This is part of what gives elite performers, athletes, artists, leaders a sense of mental control under pressure. Their inner dialogue isn't filled with vague warnings or abstract instructions, it's loaded with positive present tense commands that tell the brain exactly what to do. Another subtle but powerful element in removing negation from self-talk is that it cultivates a more empowering internal environment. When your language focuses on what you want and what you're doing right, it naturally builds self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence outcomes through your actions. This belief is foundational to personal growth and resilience. The more often you affirm your ability to act and make aligned choices, the more your brain begins to expect success instead of dreading failure. Over time, this transforms your baseline mindset from defensive to creative, from reactive to intentional. The tone in which you speak to yourself is as crucial as the words you use. The human brain responds not only to the content of language but to its emotional quality, its tone, rhythm, and intensity. This is deeply rooted in how our nervous system interprets communication. Even when you're speaking to yourself internally, your body reacts as though someone else is talking to you. A harsh, critical tone in self-talk activates the same neural circuits associated with social rejection, shame, and emotional pain. This can cause cortisol levels to rise, create muscle tension, and make the body brace as if under threat. The result is a shutdown of cognitive flexibility, creativity, and problem-solving. In contrast, a calm, firm, and encouraging tone activates circuits associated with safety, learning, and motivation. It signals to the brain that you are both the source of the challenge and the source of the solution. When self-talk is delivered with compassion and grounded authority, it provides the nervous system with structure and reassurance. This combination is essential for optimal functioning under pressure. The vagus nerve, which controls the parasympathetic response, is highly responsive to vocal tone. Even internal speech, when imagined vividly, can stimulate this system. That means your tone of voice can either escalate or de-escalate your internal state. If your tone is panicked or sharp, your breathing becomes shallow, heart rate increases, and the stress response heightens. But if your tone is measured, certain, and rhythmic, it creates coherence in the nervous system. That coherence allows the brain to access higher-order thinking and emotional regulation. This is why elite performers often train their inner dialogue to sound like a calm, focused coach rather than a frantic critic. There's also a strong connection between tone and memory. The emotional charge of a statement influences how deeply it's encoded in the brain. If you speak to yourself with urgency, frustration, or sarcasm, those emotional cues attached to the words inform negative associations. Over time, even helpful messages can begin to feel like pressure if they are delivered in a harsh tone. This creates internal resistance where part of you pushes back against your own guidance. But when the tone is warm yet assertive, the same message lands differently. "You've got this," spoken with calm confidence, is more effective than "you better not screw this up," delivered with anxiety. The first builds trust between the conscious and subconscious parts of the mind. The second builds fear and internal conflict. Training yourself to adjust your tone requires awareness and repetition. It begins by listening to the way you currently speak to yourself. Many people are surprised when they notice how often their inner voice sounds impatient, doubtful, or dismissive. This tone might echo old experiences, teachers, parents, peers, but the brain doesn't know the difference once that voice becomes internalized. The first step in rewiring this is to interrupt the tone before the words. If you catch yourself thinking, "You're so behind," ask, "How would I say this if I truly believed I could improve?" That question shifts the tone first, which then alters the phrasing. Instead of "you're so behind," it becomes "you're learning to catch up," and here's the next step. The emotional posture of that sentence is entirely different, and the nervous system responds accordingly. Another powerful strategy is to speak to yourself in the tone you would use with someone you care about deeply. Imagine a younger version of yourself, a friend going through a hard time, or even a student trying to master something new. Most people naturally use a tone that's patient, constructive, and kind in these situations. Bringing that tone inward transforms the energy of your self-talk. It tells your brain and body we're on the same team. That alignment creates what's known in neuroscience as self-coherence, a state where your thoughts, emotions, and actions are moving in the same direction. In this state, motivation increases, clarity returns, and behavior becomes more consistent with your goals. The rhythm of your tone also plays a role. A steady, intentional cadence acts like a metronome for the mind. It slows down reactive patterns and makes space for deliberate choices. This is why many effective self-talk techniques use repetition with a rhythmic flow. Saying something like you're moving forward step by step, breath by breath in a slow, steady rhythm engages both the auditory and motor systems in the brain, creating a multi-layered imprint. Over time, this rhythmic, supportive tone becomes the default soundtrack of your inner world, especially in moments of stress or uncertainty. It builds a mental environment that is not just functional but nurturing. Tone shapes identity. The way you speak to yourself teaches your brain who you are becoming. If your tone is accusatory, dismissive, or frantic, your identity begins to take on those qualities. You become someone who's always under pressure, never enough, always catching up. But if your tone is calm, empowering, and clear, your identity adapts to match. You become someone who leads yourself through challenges, who can be counted on, who can stay steady even when things are difficult. Consistency in self-talk is what transforms it from a motivational tool into a mechanism for identity change. While occasional affirmations or positive thoughts can create momentary boosts in mood or confidence, it's the daily repetition of intentional, structured self-talk that rewires the brain at a deeper level. The nervous system is constantly adapting based on what is repeated. Every time you say something to yourself, especially with emotional intensity or repetition, you reinforce a neural pathway. This is the basis of neuroplasticity. What fires together wires together. If you continually speak to yourself with doubt, criticism, or hesitation, those patterns become stronger and more automatic. But when you repeatedly speak with clarity, direction, and belief in your ability to change, you are carving out a new default mode of thinking, feeling, and behaving. This process is not passive. It requires deliberate engagement. Just like you wouldn't expect to build muscle by going to the gym once, you can't expect lasting mindset shifts from a few scattered affirmations. Consistency in self-talk means showing up for your mental and emotional conditioning every day, regardless of how you feel. It's not about faking positivity. It's about choosing language that aligns with your goals and values, even on difficult days. That daily discipline becomes a kind of inner training where the voice inside your head evolves from reactive and conditioned to conscious and constructive. Over time, that internal voice starts to sound less like a stranger and more like a trusted leader. Timing also matters. The most neurologically impactful times to engage in consistent self-talk are during transitions, when waking up, before sleep, and during moments of stress or decision-making. These are times when the brain is more plastic, more open to suggestion, and more emotionally sensitive. If you repeatedly start your day with a grounded, empowering statement like you're moving forward with clarity and purpose, the brain begins to associate that language with the onset of action. Similarly, ending your day with phrases like "you're learning from this" and "getting stronger" helps encode that message into memory during sleep, when the brain consolidates emotional and cognitive experiences. These small windows of time become anchors that stabilize the identity you're cultivating. Another crucial element of consistency is structure. Random positive statements lack the pattern recognition the brain craves. The more structured your self-talk becomes, whether through repeated phrases, scripts, or rituals, the more likely it is to create lasting change. This is why many high performers and elite professionals use very specific self-talk sequences during training, performance, and recovery. A structured self-talk practice might include a morning check-in, an affirmation loop during difficult moments, and a debrief or reflection at night. This predictable rhythm signals safety and clarity to the brain. It tells your nervous system that there is leadership present, which reduces anxiety and increases focus. There's also a compounding effect that happens with consistent self-talk. On day one, saying you are becoming more focused might feel hollow or forced. But by day 4 or day 10, those same words start to carry emotional weight, not because the phrase changed, but because the brain now has evidence to support it. Even a small action aligned with that phrase, like completing one task with intention, gets stored as proof. The subconscious mind begins to accept this new voice not just as motivational noise, but as a reliable narrator of truth. This shift is subtle at first, but over weeks and months, it results in a perceptible transformation in how you perceive challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. In fact, what often surprises people about consistent self-talk is that it begins to operate without conscious effort. After enough repetition, the new language becomes the default filter through which you interpret the world. You start to catch yourself thinking, "This is just a challenge and I can learn from it," rather than spiraling into self-blame. This automaticity is the goal, not to be perfect, but to have built a resilient, constructive inner voice that supports you in real time. That voice then becomes the foundation for all other forms of growth, from confidence and discipline to creativity and emotional intelligence. Resistance is part of the process. There will be days when the self-talk feels robotic, when the words don't seem to match your emotional state. But consistency isn't about emotional alignment, it's about neurological training. You're installing a new operating system, and just like any major upgrade, there are moments of lag or glitch. The key is not to let those moments interrupt the pattern. One of the most valuable beliefs you can embed into your consistent self-talk is, even when it feels hard, you're still wiring change. That belief turns temporary resistance into part of the journey, not a sign of failure. Consistency also builds trust. The more reliably you speak to yourself in a steady, empowering way, the more your subconscious learns to listen. Most people struggle to change not because they lack information or ability, but because their inner voice contradicts their outer actions. Consistent self-talk aligns those two forces. It closes the gap between what you want and how you think. It teaches your mind and body that your words matter and that you can be trusted to lead yourself with integrity.